speakers going, because we have two fabulous powerhouse female speakers that are going to be speaking at the banquet tonight. And it's my intense pleasure to introduce Katie Pavlich. Like I mentioned earlier today, she was at the very first SmartGirl meet and greet in Tucson, so I have a special place in my heart. I'm sure you're all aware of her for her activism and her appearances on Fox News, but I just want to give you the full background. Katie is a news editor for Townhall.com, a contributing editor to Townhall magazine, and an award-winning author of New York Times bestseller Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and Its Shameless Cover-Up. As a reporter, she has covered topics ranging from the White House scandals and the 2012 presidential election to the Second Amendment and border issues. She's a graduate of the University of Arizona with a degree in broadcast journalism and is a National Review Washington Fellow. Her deep love of the outdoors and respect for firearms are rooted in the formative experiences of growing up in the mountains of northern Arizona, rafting the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, and hunting big game with her father in the forests and deserts that very bold Goldwater called home. She's also a recent graduate of the gun sight training program, so that's very cool. So give a warm welcome to Katie Pavlich.
For having me. I can't think of any other way I'd rather spend my Saturday night than with a bunch of smart girls here in Indianapolis, so thank you so much. I know Terry Christoph isn't here tonight, but I just want to thank her for having me. Tracy as well, everyone at Smart Girl Politics, you guys are so great. I do remember meeting Jennifer for the first time in Tucson. I think it was in 2009. And I was 2009 or 2010, and I just remember coming to the first Smart Girl meeting with my best friend and showing up and saying, is there anything we can do? And then shortly after that, I moved to Washington, D.C., where I now work and live, which is interesting at times. So recently, I actually took a trip to Chicago. And the reason I was in Chicago is that I went to the National Organization for Women annual conference. And the background story on this is I was there doing a little bit of research, and before I got there, I emailed them and said, hey, I'm interested in coming as a member of the press. Here's my information. I'm credentialed on Capitol Hill, et cetera, and I got an email back the day before I was leaving, flights booked, hotel booked, saying, your press credentials will not be fulfilled. Thank you for your interest. So I, of course, expected that because they're so tolerant of women who disagree with them. And I said, you know, with all due respect, as a female member of the press, I'm just wondering what the explanation is behind your decision not to give me press credentials. And they never responded. So knowing me, I was like, well, I'm just gonna go anyway. So I get there, and trying to blend in a little bit, which didn't work out too well. But you know, first of all, it was lots of baby boomer generation, and I know the Tea Party gets a lot of flack for being too light, but let me tell you, the NOW conference definitely has nothing on the Tea Party, that's for sure. Or the Tea Party has nothing on the NOW conference. And so I got there, and of course there was not a lot of press there. It was very, very small. And I didn't really, you know, I knew, I sat in their conversations and I wanted to throw up the whole time, but I was trying to be open and tolerant. Didn't have a lot in common with these women. And it's great to be at Smart Girl because after going there, it's very refreshing to be around people like you rather than being around people like them. And I want, at the end of this conference and the end of this amazing summit this weekend, to kind of leave you with what you're up against. And although there wasn't a lot that came out of going to that NOW conference, there was some interesting and very essential things that we need to know moving forward in our battle for conservative ideas, the free market, and for freedom. So they had this little marketplace at this conference. It was very small, and ironically, they were selling things. You didn't get things for free, you didn't have to pay for things. And one of the things that they were selling was Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. And there were a lot of tables at this, not a lot, I'd say probably 15, but the majority of the tables that were there that were selling materials like this had absolutely everything to do with Marxism and Karl Marx. And I'm going to go through a little bit of some of the stuff that I picked up and spent my hard-earned money on to get. But also I forgot to mention that in order to be an attendee of the NOW conference, you have to be a member of NOW. So you're looking at one of their newest members, unfortunately. So, we all know that Karl Marx is not a fan of capitalism. And another piece of material that I picked up at their conference is Education for Socialists.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, women's liberation and the line of march of the working class. The communist movement's continuing fight for women's liberation. And that doesn't even make any sense, but okay. And in here you have the capitalist ideological offense against women today. And then you have, we talk a lot about today. I know a lot of you are new moms or you are moms. I saw a bunch of babies here, which is very good. Here, baby in the back right now. But part of this Education for Socialist material, and I'm going to read this to you, talks about the family system. And a lot of this Marxist material they were selling at this conference is actually the basis for what we're seeing today and a lot of the arguments that are made on the left and are made by the DNC and that are made by people like Nancy Pelosi on a national stage. And in terms of the family, we've seen that the breakdown of the family causes a lot of problems economically, it causes a lot of problems socially. And this is exactly what the feminist movement, backed up by NOW, wanted, the new feminist movement, the radical feminist movement after the 1960s. And this says the family system is closely intertwined with the origins and character of women's oppression, and is the question of the family. The resolution reaffirms that the family system is an indispensable pillar of class rule. It is a historical mechanism for institutionalizing the social inequality that accompanies the rise of private property and perpetuating class divisions from one generation to the next. The family is first and foremost an economic institution that has evolved a great deal and has adapted to meet the changing needs of ruling classes through all stages of class society. So you read that and you go, okay, so their goal is to basically break down the family because they see the family as a class system. And we've seen that be a very successful thing today. And so then you move on to the radicalization of women. A lot of people don't know that early on in the feminist movement, there were a lot of women involved who were a lot like us. They didn't want to be men. They wanted to be equal with men. They wanted the rights of men, but they didn't want to be men. And they actually were very family-oriented. And then the 1960s came along, and you have the roots of the new radical feminist movement. And this book, Education for Socialists, also talks about that. And it says, there was a strong current of socialist women in a number of countries who saw the fight for women's rights as part of the working class struggle and mobilized support from working class women and men on that basis. And it talks about trying to break down the women and push women into the workplace. Now, I'm a fan of women in the workplace, I'm in the workplace, but this was a way not to get women into the workplace, but a way to break down the family. And so, then we move on to the abortion fight, right? We've heard a lot about this coming out of Texas. We're about to see this fight come up on a national level with Marco Rubio. And at this conference, I learned a lot about why the far left is so adamant and so militant when it comes to abortion rights and their what they call the abortion struggle. And we don't hear the left talk a whole lot about what life actually means and when life begins and what that means. And this book really details where they're coming from and why people like Wendy Davis don't think that abortion restrictions at any level are appropriate. So reading from this, again, a different book, it says, from the beginning, the feminist component of the abortion rights movement had been the most uncompromising in its stand for total repeal of abortion laws and the right of a woman to choose abortion. One of the dangers of the developing controversy over abortion was that the population control advocates, who were influential at this time, in many pro-abortion groups, and pro-abortion groups are important because these days you hear the left say, no one's pro-abortion.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No one's actually pro-abortion, we're just pro-choice, right? Well, I have to tell you that when you're trying to abort a child at 5 months, you're very pro-abortion, you're not pro-choice. And so this goes on to say that they want to influence the debate. And so they don't want to talk about the pro-abortion groups and prop up Margaret Sanger, who was all about population control. And they knew that they would lose the fight when it came to fighting people who talked about the right for life. And they said leadership in the women's liberation movement was needed to shift the debate off this axis and squarely pose the question on the basis of a woman's right to control her own body. We've heard that before. This was particularly important in order to involve Black, Puerto Rican, and Chicana women in the abortion struggle, since most population control theories and proposals are marked by racist attitudes and assumptions. So they're covering up their basis for abortion in order to win the abortion debate because they knew they would lose on the pro-life argument, which is exactly what they're doing today. They're losing that argument. But this is something that was written in the 1970s and something that set up the argument that we're seeing today. And so I'll stop reading from this Education for Socialists because that's not what we're here for. But moving forward, a lot of what these women at this conference had in common was an entitlement attitude and government dependency. They want to break down the family. They want females and women not dependent on their family for support, but instead dependent on the government. And this comes into modern day and really shows a lot about where we are, because even yesterday when President Obama gave his first press conference since April, he talked about 26-year-olds being kids. Not adults, kids. He used the term kids multiple times. And I can tell you that I'm not 26 yet, but I don't feel like a kid. We shouldn't treat 26-year-olds like kids. A lot of people on Twitter, talked about how they had graduated college, been in the military, been married, they had their own home, they had been teachers entrusted with hundreds of students by the time they were 26 years old. We're not kids, and they should stop treating us that way. And I know that Sandra Fluke got a lot of attention, and I hate giving her more attention. But my office in Washington, D.C. is actually in Roslyn, Virginia, which is right across from Georgetown University. And when she got up in front of Congress and started talking about how I should pay for her birth control as a young professional who was younger than her working, it was really hard for me to look across the river at Georgetown University every day and see that university, knowing that there was this woman there who was on a public interest scholarship paid for by taxpayers, who also wanted me, who was working and earning a private paycheck in Washington, D.C., to pay for her birth control. And it's not just about that, it's being dependent on the government for everything else. But one thing that I noticed also at the NOW conference was that the main theme was that these women were willing to back the Democratic Party no matter what, right? They were totally willing to be for the status quo, and that included propping up Ted Kennedy, propping up Anthony Weiner, propping up Elliot Spitzer, John Edwards. We've seen lately with Bob Filmer out of San Diego, where are the calls for his head, like we saw with Todd Akin and Richard Murdoch when it came to the 2012 presidential election. But the great thing about Smart Girl is that we don't like the status quo. We're the opposite of now. They've been happy with the status quo for 40 years because it serves their purpose. They're willing to cover up bad behavior for the sake of the party, and so they don't have to tread on the sacred ground, as Nancy Pelosi would say, of abortion. And smart girls like you don't like it when politicians turn you into victims. I was so happy to see that a lot of you went to the gun range today, because there's nothing more empowering than shooting rifles or pistols. We don't like it when politicians grow government, so it makes more people dependent on government. We don't like when politicians break their promises, and we especially don't like when they cover up bad behavior in the state for the sake of a party. And I don't care if it's the GOP, and I'd like to reiterate what Kira said this weekend when she said it's really a shame that they didn't send someone here this weekend. When they have a perceived women problem, they don't have to have that problem. But I don't feel really bad for them when they're accused of a war on women and not willing to clean up their own act and come to places like this where you're going to work hard for that women vote more than men, and women, actually control the economics in most homes these days. And it's just really unfortunate that they're not willing to notice that. But the good thing is that you guys aren't willing to put up with it, whether it's from the left or from the GOP. And so, a lot of what we've been doing lately is fighting the Obama administration on some of their big initiatives. And little groups like this, as you know, have been singled out for bullying. And anyone who thinks that Barack Obama is not directly involved in punishing his enemies quote him, is really has their head in the sand. And I know that a lot of you do as you do, because when it comes to Barack Obama saying scandals like the IRS targeting people like you for your political beliefs being phony, that's not good enough for us. And when Eric Holder, says, yeah, my department sent a bunch of guns down to Mexico and people are probably still gonna die as a result, that's not good enough for us either. And then when Hillary Clinton, the darling of the left and the leader of the feminist movement, modern feminist movement, says that, what difference does it make that 4 Americans have been killed?
A hell of a difference.
A hell of a difference, exactly. That's not good enough for us. And so, what I think is most important about weekends like this, Smart Girl Summit, everything that you guys do every single day in your spare time, you're not getting paid, you're blogging on your own, you're going out of your way to put yourself in the line of fire in your own communities to make sure that people hear your voice and that our ideas are heard. It's important to debunk the narrative. The media doesn't pay attention to your voice. They pay attention to the voice of Nancy Pelosi. They pay attention to the voice of the Kennedy family. They pay attention to the Sandra Flooks. And it's really important to push up against that. And I may have talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again. Last fall at the DNC convention, I had the unfortunate assignment of being there and sitting for hours listening to speeches. And for days and days and days, the main theme of the war on women was being screamed from the podium. And after listening to that for a few days, they decided to play a 5-minute tribute video to Ted Kennedy. And that was, after they had Bill Clinton speak right after Sandra Fluck. And I was booked on Piers Morgan's show that night. Already knew it. And I said, I hope he brings this up because I'm going to talk about it. And I thought about what I was going to say, and I'm sitting in the green room. They had everything set up in a bar that night, and he had one of the Kennedy family members on before, and they were gushing over Ted Kennedy and what a great person he was, and all that he did for women, and the feminist movement, and everything he did for the Democratic Party, and how he was such an advocate for abortion rights because he was sleeping with everyone. Of course he was. And finally, we're on a panel. It was Richard Grenell, who's a conservative. He's more on the foreign policy side. Van Jones, and Hillary Rosen, who's of course the woman who made fun of and belittled Ann Romney for being a stay-at-home mom. She hates all of you. And I was hoping the conversation turned this way. And Piers brought it that way. It's because Mitt Romney was in this tribute video talking about how he believed women should have a right to choose in the early 90s. And he said, Katie, do you think that it was awkward for you to hear him talking about being pro-choice? And I said, what was uncomfortable for me, Piers, was that in a convention that claims to be fighting the war on women, you guys would show a 5-minute tribute video to a man who left a woman to die in his car. No one really watches Piers' show, but immediately, Hillary Rosen jumps in and says, oh, stop it. And Piers says, I think that comment was below the belt on her. And it's like, I think what he did was below the belt, but... And during the break, Hillary Rosen turned to me and said, I think what you said was disgusting. Well, I think what you did was disgusting, Hillary. I'm sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry, but and then the producer called me a week later and said, you probably could have said that in a nicer way, different words. And I was just like, I really don't think there's another way to say that. Okay. Not going to change. I'll keep this brief, I'll finish up, but I just want you guys to know that you're doing good work, your voice is starting to be heard. The majority of the country is now pro-life. Women like you are giving conservative women who are not getting a voice. Former Miss America talked about one person making a difference today, and I can tell you that one person makes a hell of a difference, and every single one of you are making a difference, and it's very important to debunk this narrative that there was only one side of the female voice. Those women, Hillary Rosen, Hillary Clinton, Sandra Fluck, Nancy Pelosi, now do not speak for me, and I know they don't speak for you, and it's time for you to be heard. Thank you guys for coming this weekend.
excited to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Karen Handel. Karen and I met during her gubernatorial race in